I'm going to read Chapter 3 of my book, Cold Pizza for Breakfast, and Chapter 3 is entitled, Piglet Meets Joe Namath. Since my family lived on the grounds of a military school and we ate our meals in the dining halls with the cadets, my mom still loved to remind us and my siblings, when I was a bride, I was deprived of having to cook. All of our meals were served to us by good-looking uniformed young men. That's Mom joking. She loved not having to cook. Keeping track of all of us kids was difficult enough. As private military high schools go, Peekskill Military Academy was a good one. Founded in 1833 with strong traditions and loyal alumni. Coincidentally, the Martin Guitar Company was also founded that same year. Good karma, I guess, the guitars balancing out the guns. PMA's biggest rival was New York Military Academy. There was no love lost between the two schools, and I had learned that Donald Trump went to New York Military Academy, with military school strict haircut rules. It makes you wonder how he wore his hair back then. Occasionally, the top cadets, maybe one or two a year, would be chosen to attend West Point, the U.S. Military Academy, after graduating from PMA. West Point was a few miles up the Hudson on the west side of the river. Two of the best cadets who ever attended PMA, Bart Creed and Mike Kilroy, both fine athletes and students, went to Vietnam. Their names are just two of the 58,195 carved into the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Growing up at an all-boys military school was often a lot of fun. The school had excellent sports programs, so I regularly got to watch football, basketball, baseball, even swimming and wrestling matches. Sometimes I would bring girlfriends with me, and they loved being around so many teenage boys in military uniforms. Two of PMA's best swimmers, Carl Roby and Steve Rarick, won gold medals in the 1968 Olympics. School was so proud. One day, when I was in fourth grade, all of this inspired an idea that I thought was a surefire winner, a dedicated cheerleading squad. All the Lavin kids attended Assumption School from kindergarten through 8th grade. It was a very traditional Catholic school with uniforms, no gym, no frills, but great basics in reading, writing, and arithmetic. The 8th grade did have a basketball team that competed in the Westchester County CYO, Catholic Youth Organization League. So 8th grade girls, the lucky ones, got to be cheerleaders. That was it for girls at that school when it came to sports. 1 year of cheerleading for a select few. This wasn't enough for me, so I organized a cheerleading squad for the 4th grade girls. We had nobody to cheer for yet, and it would be another 4 years until we would have an actual team to cheer for. But holy cow, we would be ready. Then one morning, I woke up with a brainstorm. I have a cheerleading squad with nobody to cheer for, and I live at an all-boys military school that has no cheerleaders. I wrote to the head of PMA's athletic department, Vincent Gabriel, offering to let the school have the use of my cheerleading squad at all football and basketball games for the coming season. I added that if the school allowed, we could also cheer for swimming meets and wrestling matches. I knew that swimming and wrestling didn't normally have cheerleaders, but I felt that cheerleaders would make those sports much more popular. I carefully hand-wrote my letter in my best Catholic school script and listed reasons why I thought this would work. It would raise school spirit, which in turn would help the teams to win more games, make the school more well-known, attract more students, and increase enrollment, which meant better teams. My list just went on and on. I told him how I would ask the parents of the girls if it would be okay, and maybe the parents would offer to drive us to the away games too. An additional sign that this was a great idea, the PMA colors were blue and white. And so were our Catholic uniforms. Coincidence? I think not. We wouldn't even have to buy cheerleading outfits. We could just pin a large P on the front of our school uniforms. I mailed the letter rather than hand it to Mr. Gabriel at dinner or walk across the campus to his home. Mailing it would make it look absolutely official and show how serious I was. A few days later, I heard my father chuckling on the telephone, and by the questions he was asking, I knew my letter was being discussed. He let out a big guffaw after he said, "The away games, too?" He could barely catch his breath. He was laughing so hard. I received a typed letter back from Mr. Gabriel thanking me for my offer, but explaining that as PMA was an all-boys school, there were legal reasons why they couldn't have girl cheerleaders at the games. His letter was kind and to the point. I wasn't surprised by the rejection letter because of the phone call that I overheard, but part of me was still stunned because I thought it was such an obviously brilliant idea. Lack of cheerleaders notwithstanding, the absolute best part about living on the grounds of PMA was that from 1963 to 1967, it was the summer home of the New York Jets. Sonny Werblin, who owned the team at the time, had two sons, Hubbard and David, who both attended PMA, and during his visits in the early 1960s, Sonny got the idea that it would be a great location for the Jets. There were dormitories, a dining hall, a locker room, and a playing field, all in close proximity. When PMA was chosen, all of us kids, not just the Lavins, but all the faculty kids were thrilled. My brothers Greg, Tom, and Ed got jobs in the dining hall and in the dorms, serving meals to the players and also cleaning their rooms and making their beds every morning. Special beds had to be trucked in at the beginning of training camp because even back then, the players were much bigger than the average high school kid. They had assigned rooms. Quarterbacks roomed with quarterbacks. Defensive linemen roomed with defensive linemen. 2 and sometimes 3 to a room. They had a curfew of 10 p.m. during the week. I got into the act, too, babysitting for assistant coach Buddy Ryan's young sons. I recently found out that the current coach of the Jets at the time when I wrote this book, he was the current coach, Rex Ryan, is Buddy's son. And then I wondered, could it be? I Googled him to find out he was born in 1962. Holy crap! I was Rex Ryan's babysitter. Let's go Jets! But I never cussed around him. He didn't learn that from me. Every day in summer, I would go to the field and watch the Jets practice, and I mean every day. Sometimes I wouldn't stay for more than an hour, but I would always be there at some point in the afternoon. One day, I had a stomach bug and didn't go, but the next day I did, and one of the players came over and asked where I was the day before. I think I was 11 at the time, and my face turned scarlet red. I so idolized the players that it never occurred to me that they would notice that a skinny young girl was absent one day. But it also showed that how few people came to watch the Jets, that the Jets recognized the regulars. What I remember most about that summer when the Jets trained in Peekskill was the year Joe Namath and John Hewart joined the team. Everything changed. Joe Namath, a quarterback fresh out of the University of Alabama, was paid $400,000, the most a professional football player had ever received. And John Hewart, also a quarterback, but from Notre Dame, was paid $200,000, also an astronomical amount at the time. The Jets were an AFL team, not an NFL team. The American Football League was still considered a bunch of upstarts. John Hewart was a couple inches shorter than Namath, and there were a lot of people who thought that his sidearm style of throwing wouldn't work against the professional football's tall defensive linemen. The skeptics were later proved correct. Some of the players, however, were rooting for Hewart to get the quarterback slot, since he was paid half of Namath's salary. and there was that whole underdog thing going on. But when they took the field, it was clear from day one that Joe Namath was something special. Oh yeah, it was so clear. In every way. Suddenly, daily practices had a couple thousand spectators instead of a couple hundred. Dozens of press people were coming up from New York City. Lots of pretty young women would sit in the stands and feast their eyes on the players, especially Namath. When he completed a long, impressive pass, they would clap and cheer as if it was a real game. We heard a story once that when the team finished practicing one day, there were naked girls waiting for Joe in the locker room. I was so young and naive, I figured that if the players walked into the locker room and saw naked girls, they would turn around and run right out screaming. All the players were very nice to us faculty kids. On the days that players got cut from the team, we would feel bad for them, for those who didn't make it. That part of the summer training camp was always hard. We'd watch them pack up their cars and sadly drive away. But we knew Joe Namath was never going to get cut. Joe had an Irish setter dog named Pharaoh that needed walking and a dark green Lincoln Continental convertible that needed washing. So besides serving him meals and making his bed, sometimes my brothers would walk his dog and wash his car. They said he was always a very good tipper. Joe often parked his car near our house, and one day, when he was walking toward his car, a bunch of us faculty kids were throwing a football around. Someone, I don't remember who, dared me to ask Joe to teach me how to throw the football. Now, normally, I would be way too shy to do this kind of thing, but by now everybody knew he was a nice guy, especially nice to kids. So I screwed up my card and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Namath, but can you show me how to throw a good spiral?" I think the fact that I knew the term spiral helped. He stopped and said, "Sure." I told him I was lefty, but he said, "That's okay. It's the same principle," as he showed me how he spread his fingers out over the laces to get a good grip, and then moved his arm back and then forward while he turned his hand slightly as he let the ball go. It floated out over our yard and landed softly on the grass. I ran and got it, then imitated what he had just done. But too shy to throw it back to Joe, I threw a slightly wobbly spiral in the direction of my little sister Mary, who was walking her pet albino guinea pig, Piglet. When he saw her little pet, he said, "What's that?" I told him it was my sister's guinea pig, and he asked if he could pet him. Mary's quite young, just 8 years old, and not really a football fan, but everybody knew who Joe Namath was, including her. She nervously picked up Piglet and carried him over to Joe. Joe Namath very sweetly tickled Piglet under his chin and stroked his little head. Then Piglet bit him on the index finger of his right hand. Joe pulled his hand back and said, "Ow!" And Mary, cradling Piglet in her arms, ran as fast as she could into the house, up the stairs, and hid under the bed. I was just a kid myself and wasn't sure what to do. Where am I? Piglet bit Joe Namath. This is a potential national catastrophe. I ran into the house, too, and found Mary under her bed, sobbing. She was so afraid that Piglet was going to be taken away from her for biting Joe Namath. What if his finger got infected? What if he couldn't play football? Would our brothers be fired? Would our dad be fired? I don't think Dad was worried about getting fired, but he did pace around the house all afternoon. This was just the kind of unexpected disaster he was always worried about. "Do you know how much Joe Namath's hands are worth?" he said to no one in particular. "At least $1 million. Each! How could this have happened?" Mary stayed under her bed the whole afternoon, expecting at any moment to have Piglet snatched away. But nothing happened. Nothing at all. Life went on. Not all that long for Piglet. He was an albino, after all, with a shortened lifespan. Mary's a school teacher now. Well, she's actually a retired school teacher now. And she's got a husband named Tom. Yes, another Tom in the house. 2 sons, Ian and Noah. And she's got a beautiful golden doodle named Theo. But to this day, if you want to make her flinch, just say Joe Namath and Piglet in the same sentence. She goes crazy. If you ever meet her, you have to do it to her. Oh. The guinea pig bite must not have had any lasting effect because, as any football fan knows, the New York Jets won the Super Bowl in January 1969, defeating the Baltimore Colts 16-7. The first AFL team to beat an NFL team. Everyone at PMA, from Gene McMichael, who ran the dining hall, to the kitchen cooks, to Rene, the campus gardener, to my brothers, felt like they had a hand in helping the Jets win. I remember once when Howard Cosell was visiting the team. I was already a big fan of his. I listened to his Sunday night program, Speaking of Everything, all the time. My brother Eddie told me that he waited on Howard Cosell in the dining room and that Howard ate an entire meal with an unlit cigarette dangling out of the side of his mouth. I checked with Eddie to see if this really was true, and this is what he wrote to me. Hi, Teeny. Was me. It did happen, but you were wrong about the cigarette. It was lit. It was called press day for the Jets. All the media came to PMA to meet and greet the Jets. They put me, Brian Masella, and the Imhoff boys, other faculty kids, in white waiters' jackets, and we waited tables in the PMA dining room. We were each assigned tables, and we knew Cosell was in the building, and we're all hoping he'd sit at one of our tables. Lo and behold, Cosell sits at one of mine. He was with some folks, don't know who, but he was definitely acting as the head of the table. At some point, he lit a cigarette and proceeded to eat his meal with it hanging out of his mouth. Never puffed, never took it out, just hung there the whole time. I was watching the ash as it got longer and longer, wondering if it would land on his plate. Never said a word to me except when I asked if he was done, and he grunted affirmative. End of story. Ash disappeared to who knows where. The ether of human experience. I take the memory to my grave, just telling it like it is. Each of us got a $5 tip from ABC Sports a week later. We were ecstatic. Bought a ring ding and a can of Yoo-Hoo from Chet's Corner Store for 25 cents and put the rest in the bank. Life was good. FYI, Barbara Feldon was there too. From Get Smart. She was making a commercial with Joe Willie. Don't be jealous. Ed. When I ran into Howard Cosell coming out of the dining room, it may have been that very same day, I couldn't help myself. I ran up to him and I said, Mr. Cosell, I listen to your program every Sunday night. You are very smart. I didn't know what kind of reaction I would get. There were stories that he could be rough on people, but he seemed completely taken aback. He laughed, shook my hand, and said, That is so kind of you to tell me. You must be very smart to listen. I'm not such a big football fan anymore. It's too violent, and often players end up with debilitating and or chronic injuries that can shorten their lives. But back then, it was exciting to have the Jets in our own backyard for entire summers at a time. That's the end of Chapter 3 from Cold Pizza for Breakfast. Maybe someday I'll read Chapter 4. The Catholic Church introduces me to my first illegal beer, and TV introduces me to the Smothers Brothers. Stay tuned.